music fans, music collectors, and all hobbyists. Welcome to the Car King Sports and Variety Show. I'm your host, the Catman, Brian Cataquet, a.k.a. the Car King. We are live on ABC's KMET 1490am.com, your number one spot right here for news and talk on the West Coast. You can also catch my show live on Alexa by saying, Alexa, play KMET Radio for your listening pleasure. On the phone line, I welcome in frontman, lead singer of the legendary country rock band, the Burrito Brothers. We welcome in Chris P. James. Chris, Brian C., thanks so much for being on the program.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you, Brian. It's flattering, and I'm very appreciative to join you this morning.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Chris, let's begin. Let's talk a little bit about your early roots in music and how you became a performer.
Oh, gosh, it goes way back. I come from a family where all four boys, my father's four sons, all went into music as a profession. Dad was a great jazz trumpet player. Actually, it wasn't his career. It was a sideline, but he managed to be on a few significant albums and things. He's very good. And So I come from Wichita, Kansas, and upon graduating from high school, decided to go out and try to make it in music, and went to L.A. first and struggled for about 2 years. And when I tried Nashville, I found that it was a lot easier to find work. It's more of a centralized place for finding gigs. If you join the musicians union, there's the bulletin board and all that. And so I kind of never looked back. After that, I've been in Nashville my whole adult life.
Now, Chris, who were some of the artists you admired growing up?
Oh, gosh, it would definitely be the band I'm now in, strangely enough. I mean, a lot of kids certainly weren't aware of the Flying Burrito Brothers in 1969, but maybe it's because of the part of the country I lived. Kansas was a little more into those country rock groups, the Byrds, Pure Prairie League, Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Poco, etc. And so I was actually aware of Gram Parsons when most people didn't seem to know who he was. Of course, I loved the Beatles. And at my age, as a little boy, I liked the Monkees, who actually, they turn out to be pretty good. They stand up to the test of time pretty well.
No, they definitely do. And you mentioned you were a fan of the band that you're in. Now, the band originally formed in L.A. in around 68, 69, right? Talk about the band's early history.
Okay, the very first Flying Burrito Brothers were Barry Tashin and Ian Dunlop. Ian came up with the name. He was kind of a humorous kind of guy. He also came up with the name, the International Submarine Band that he was in earlier with Gram Parsons. And these guys, Barry and Ian, led a just loose bar aggregation, you might call it, who played around L.A. in 1968 and had really cool people sit in with them, like Jesse Ed Davis and Leon Russell and Junior Markham and Delaney Bramlett and Gram Parsons used to sit in with them. So when Hillman and Parsons left the Byrds, kind of not at the same time, but the next album that either of them were on after Sweetheart of the Rodeo was The Gilded Palace of Sin. They decided to call their new group that name, the Flying Burrito Brothers. I'm not sure why they were so interested in, why they liked that name so much. It's just kind of a silly name, but that's what they did. They stole the name from Ian Dunlop, essentially, and the first group that made the classic Gilded Palace of Sin album in 1969 on A&M Records was Gram Parsons, Chris Hillman, Chris Etheridge, and Sneaky Pete Kleinow.
Well, now something that's very interesting, Chris, I didn't know. Now, the band's first two albums, Gilded Palace of Sin, and Rolling Stone has it listed as one of the top 500 albums of all time.
Yeah,
Those two albums really, so that album really put the band on the map, right?
I think so, although it's more after the fact. It didn't make a smash in its own day. Really, Gram Parsons' notoriety is the same story. I remember it wasn't until sometime kind of into the mid or late 80s that people really began to know who he was. It seemed like he was pretty unknown. Those albums weren't smash successes, that's for sure. But they've gone on to be highly, highly regarded.
Yeah, like I said, it put you on the map, and also the album Burrito Deluxe, which is extremely popular. Now, interesting about the Burrito Deluxe album, which many people may not know, that album contained Mick Jagger and Keith Richards' Wild Horses, right? But released before the Stones put it on Sticky Fingers.
That's correct. Yeah. I always liked it. I think I prefer it a little bit over the Stones, although I'm a fan of the Stones too. The story I've heard and read about Wild Horses was that Gram was involved with helping them get a pedal steel player on it, and then asked if he could record the song with the Flying Burrito Brothers, and they had a stipulation that only if their terms were that they couldn't release it as a single, which is a crying shame because I believe that the Flying Burrito Brothers could have had a hit with that song.
Yeah, I mean, no question about it. Also, around 1981, now the Burrito Brothers around 81 signed a deal with Curb Records, right? Which produced Hearts on the Line, which was released, and 3 singles from that LP, which was really played all over country radio. She's a Friend of a Friend, Too Much, Honky Tonkin', She Belongs to Everyone But Me. Any insight on how those songs were like put together, originated?
Well, probably not a lot since I wasn't in the group yet. The first time I ever played with the Burrito Brothers was 1986, and then I sort of got into their sphere of different people, kind of knew the people who were in the group and stuff. Some years better than others. If you look at the entries of the Burrito Brothers over the years, it changes so many people. It's astounding. And it was at that time in 81, 80, somewhere in there, when they got the Curb deal. They moved from L.A., from Southern California, to Nashville. The Curb deal was a Nashville-based thing. And they also dropped the word flying at that point.
They did.
Just the Burrito Brothers. I would say, I think it's pretty safe to say, even though I wasn't involved with that album, that they had adopted a conscious effort to try to make inroads into country charts, country radio success. And it was a time, I've heard some people jokingly refer to it as the great credibility scare in country when there was just better music. Most musicians feel. I would certainly concur. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band had nice things coming out. Vince Gill was at his peak. The Burrito Brothers got a deal like that. It was a pretty good era for country music.
And you mentioned 1986 was the year you started with the band. Around 1988, the double album Back to the Sweethearts of the Rodeo was released in Holland. Can you share some insights on that?
That was actually, I need to correct you. I didn't join the band in 1986. I just played a couple gigs with them. I was one of the musicians at that time, they were just the 2 guys calling themselves the Burrito Brothers, and so in order to play performances, they had different musicians at different gigs. And I wound up on an album that was multiple artists. It was from a Gram Parsons tribute, and that's from 1987. It was called Wheels, And so that was my first entry to be credited with playing with the Burrito Brothers. But I wasn't a full-time, actual, face in the picture, in the group photo, member of the group until 2009.
So it was really in '86 when you tributed Gram Parsons. That's when you first really got involved.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe that Sweetheart of the Rodeo, the back to the Sweethearts of the Rodeo, was something of a house cleaning thing where they had a bunch of the two guys, Gib Gilboa and John Beelan, just made a double album out of a bunch of their demos, a whole bunch of things they had recorded, and then got it placed on a label in Holland, I believe it was. I think that's what you just said.
Right.
Yeah.
And how about around 1998, 99, the Gram Parsons Notebook? Any information on that? Any insights you can share with us on the Gram Parsons Notebook?
Well, yeah, I was involved with that. The guy who spearheaded it, who got the deal and led the way, was Mike Ward, and he was a friend, as I was too, of Graham's old buddy John Nuis. And Nuis had a notebook of Gram Parsons' writings and jottings, and some pages had pretty full lyrics. A lot of things were just ideas, just little phrases here and there and stuff. And Mike got a deal for just various Nashville musicians and singer-writers to make an album from that notebook. And people would complete they'd come up with the music, and in most cases add lyrics too, because I don't think very many of the entries included full lyrics, which kind of surprised me. I was more into finding a way to make the words fit whatever Gram had written, and not so much think that they needed to be revised. But people did a lot of that, and we were involved and wrote a few songs. We had one called Between Your Hands and Mine, and then we've got this new one, Sometimes You Just Can't Win. And those didn't make the cut. There were so many people getting involved in that Gram Parsons Notebook that we only had one entry. It was Apple Tree. And so these other ones sort of sat collecting dust for a while until they seemed so perfect for inclusion in the recent Burrito Brothers stuff.
And then in the millennium, around 2000, 2001, yourself, Castleman, Rick Leno, right, and Hatter, you produced Mr. Hyde, Taxi Records.
Yes.
So that was a popular track, right? That was a popular album.
I think so. I mean, it's gained notoriety in the years since. I mean, it wasn't kind of like you just said about the earliest Flying Burrito Brothers stuff. It wasn't a smash success, but it sure was liked and well regarded. It was, in our minds, the name of the group was a tribute, a tip of the hat, just like our new album's title, a tip of the hat to the Byrds. If you are familiar with the album that the Byrds made after Sweetheart of the Rodeo, it was called Dr. Byrds and Mr. Hyde. And so in our minds, we weren't referring to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We were referring to the Byrds.
Yeah, I'm just reading some of this, all these tracks you released, which you have a long history here. 2004, The Whole Enchilada by Burrito Deluxe was released. Any information on that you can share with the audience? The Whole Enchilada in 2004?
Yeah, that's the incarnation of the Burritos just before I came in, and I was really kind of floating around that. I guessed on one of those albums. I don't think it's Whole Enchilada. I think there's 3 albums by the Burrito Deluxe incarnation of the group, and that was headed up by Carlton Moody, talented singer. lives kind of multinational. I think he lives most of the time in Paris, France, but he's a American-born guy. He's kind of a bluegrass type musician, and they had a financial backer when they started that group, and so they were able to pay retainers to some fairly big names. They got Garth Hudson from the band in that group, and Sneaky Pete was the big calling card. Sneaky Pete Kleinow, who was actually an original member of the Flying Burrito Brothers, so that was pretty darn special. Walter Egan was in that. Rick Lano was the drummer, and so the carryover when those guys ran out of gas or decided to back it off, they'd had a lot of personnel changes. Sneaky Pete died. In fact, Richard Bell, the wonderful piano player, also passed away during that time that group was going. And Carlton, I think, just kind of decided he'd had his run with it. And we were asked to carry on and changed it back to Burrito Brothers. Well, the label who signed us in 2010 in England, SPV Records, required, said I needed to obtain the trademark rights to the name, something I'd never done before, but lo and behold, it wasn't that hard, and it was available. And so we just went back to calling it Burrito Brothers. It had previously been called Burrito Deluxe, but everybody just figures it's the same group. If you look on Wikipedia, all the versions are on the same page. They're thought of as just the continuation of the same group with these subtle name differences.
Now you mentioned Sneaky passed away. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Is that correct to say?
Yes, that's correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a shame. God rest his soul.
Yeah, sweet guy, good guy.
He was a good guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you mentioned SPV Records in England. Around 2010, 2011, the album Sound as Ever was released on SPV. Anything you could share about creating that album?
Well, that was our conscious effort to return to sort of full circle, to return to that cosmic Bakersfield country-flavored progressive rock. And I think we did succeed at that. I think the group had been, like you pointed out in the 80s, that country radio focus. And then the Burrito Deluxe thing was kind of a different animal. It was, I'm not sure how to describe that compared to Sound as Ever, but it seems to me Sound as Ever was more consciously wanting to return to the roots and make the group sound more like the earliest versions did. And Sound as Ever itself was Gram's, what do you call it, salutation? I think salutation is the greeting, whatever, the end of every letter that Gram wrote. He would, write a letter to a friend, and then down at the bottom, Sound as Ever, Gram. That was his sign-off on writing letters to friends and things. And Walter Egan he had been previously in the Burrito Deluxe lineup, and he stayed on board for the Burritos, the Sound as Ever album, and he included his song Carolina Calypso, which is a lyric that Gram Parsons gave him through Emmylou Harris. Walter had been friends with Emmylou even before Gram knew her. And he tells the story of how Emmylou brought this sheet of lyrics for Carolina Calypso, written in Gram's own handwriting, written by Gram, and said, Gram suggests you write music to this, Walter. And then, unfortunately, they never got to compare notes and finish the co-write. Gram died. But Walter regards that as the last Gram Parsons song.
Wow, we're talking to from the legendary country rock band The Burritos. We have with us Chris P. James. Chris, I want to really get the audience to know, history of the band, and that's why I'm going over some of these events that happened in the band's history. The timeline of the band is from, 67 to present. So it's got a long, long, rich history in country rock music.
Oh, very much so, and it has an amazing turnover. It's more than just about any band you find. There's new people almost every year. It's astounding. There aren't any two albums in a row that have exactly the same personnel. There's always some guy left or added on, a new guy come in. It's astounding. I think there's something like 60 or more names of talented musicians who've been in and out.
No question. I mean, the band has a strong presence in the industry for decades. Now, we do have a cut. Let's talk about your new release. You want to mention the title of your new release and some of the songs?
Sure. I alluded to it a moment ago. The Notorious Burrito Brothers is a tip of the hat, a nod to the Byrds, whose fifth album was called The Notorious Byrd Brothers. And there was a little story behind that. Gram Parsons was at a couple of the sessions just as an observer because he joined the group soon after. He's on their next album, their sixth album, Sweetheart of the Rodeo. And they all thought that funny name that Ian Dunlop had come up with and gave to the loose jamming band, the Flying Burrito Brothers, in 1968. They thought that was funny and a hoot, and they were tossing around the idea of calling their fifth album The Flying Burrito Brothers by the Byrds. And cooler heads prevailed, I think, where it just seemed a little confusing, but it morphed into the Notorious Byrd Brothers, which I think is easy to see as a similar name. And so knowing that that's right at the very heart, the inception of everything about this band that we're so happy to be involved with and carrying on, the Burrito Brothers, we thought it would be very cool to have an album by that title, The Notorious Burrito Brothers. It's very much a tip of the hat to those guys back then. And I also think there are those who, I think I've got a friend who calls them the haters, curmudgeons. I think it's narrow-minded. Those who think that the group shouldn't even still be going, that we're not the real Burrito Brothers. But the trouble is, if you look at the history, tell me who is. You know, it's very hard to arrive at some definitive lineup that you could claim is absolutely it. So we're just carrying on. Our job is to do the best work we can because we're proud to be keeping this legacy alive. But anyway, the, quote, haters who think we shouldn't do this is why the word notorious applies. You know, it's like that we even for a moment there thought we might jokingly call our album The Notorious Bogus Burrito Brothers. But the label didn't like that idea.
So we do have we're going to play Sometimes You Just Can't Win from the Notorious Burrito Brothers. Sean, let's play Sometimes You Just Can't Win.
Great.
Every morning when I wake up, I burn my fingers did she have to do this to me? Oh, the same thing will happen again.
That was Sometimes You Just Can't Win, the Burrito Brothers. Sounds great, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the Gram Parsons lyric from Notebook. It was in his own handwriting, and we also found that it was a paraphrasing of words by Fred Neil, the great folk singer. Gram actually knew Fred Neil. He saw him in one of his albums playing organ, and so the credit goes to Gram Parsons, Fred Neil, and the Burrito Brothers because we composed the music to it. And our thought behind that was to try to be similar to the classic era Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones of the day that Gram was so into them and hanging out with Keith and all that. And it feels like we pretty much accomplished that. So the idea of having a Gram thing that's Rolling Stones-ish was our whole idea there.
And they're telling me I have 30 seconds for everyone listening. Where can fans pick up the album, Chris?
I always say just go to Amazon. It's in. You can order if you want to physically have a copy. Otherwise, the usual sort of download places. And we can help if you want to go to www.theburritobrothers.net. I think I said one too few W's.
TheBurritoBrothers.net.
Yes, yeah.
And also, you have a great Facebook page. I recommend people to check you out on Facebook.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, listen. Go ahead. I appreciate your time. Then, I thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's just been a treat. I'm very grateful.
Absolutely. And, you stay safe, okay?
Okay, can I quickly say, I just realized I never named the guys. It's Bob Hatter on guitar and bass, Tony Paoletta on pedal steel, and Peter Young on drums and vocals.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll see you soon, and hopefully we can do it again.
All right, I hope so, too. Thank you. You have a good day and stay safe.
Take care of yourself. Everyone stay safe. Happy collecting to all.